Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Today I want to look at a subject that you'd think is kind of um, doesn't need treatment because it's so essential to the kind of religious culture that we claim. But as I prepared this lesson, I realized that there's a lot about how faith works that people don't quite figure out. And I'm going to look with you today at how faith works. How does faith work? How does it operate? I'm going to start by talking about faith in the lives of women I have known. The person who led me to faith in Yeshua was a woman, Andrea Anderson, a concert pianist, still alive, living 9 miles from Altadena, where I lived. And she was a timid person, but a believer, and she felt she had a responsibility. And so she invited me to a Bible study she had in the cafeteria of Manhattan School of Music. She was an introvert and very vulnerable, but she was very courageous. And she was the instrument through whom I came to faith in Yeshua. There were other women in her church group who were nurses at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Hilda Kohler, and Letty Hendy, and Faith Johnson, 3 women who were part of this College of Careers Bible study group from the church that Andrea attended. They also were great people of faith who took an interest in me, and I'm grateful. Another person I think of who is known to most of us, if not all of us, certainly most of us, is Ellen Goldsmith, who when she was alive had the stature of being perhaps my best friend because she was most involved with me, most interested in my life, most helpful. Ellen Goldsmith was an amazing woman. She was a marriage and family therapist. She had an extremely busy schedule. She'd see her first client or deal with her first client on the phone, maybe 6 o'clock and 6:30 in the morning, and she wouldn't be finished until 11 or 11:30 at night. And she was doing that, at least 5 days a week. And she had a husband who was a professional boxer. When she was Ellen Quarry, he was Mike Quarry, the brother of Jerry Quarry, who fought Muhammad Ali. And Jerry had his brains bashed out when he was a boxer, and he died in his early to mid-50s of severe frontal lobe brain damage, and that's exactly what happened with Mike. And when I met Ellen and Mike some years before that, he already was unemployable. He just had lost his edge. And she took great care of him with great honor, and it was a very, very full-time job. And that was another thing that made her impressive. But what I want to talk about now is that I want to talk about her Bible. She had a Bible that was all beat up. I can picture it. The covers, if they weren't missing, they were just barely hanging on, because she, even though she had such a busy schedule, she would get up about 2 hours before she had to leave the house in the morning, and she would be studying the Bible. And she was a person, it was not enough to tell her what to believe. She had to know why. So if I told her something about Jewish practice, she'd say, why? Because once she knew why, she was all in. But she had to know why before she did it. And she was very serious about her relationship with God. And she touched many, many lives of her clients' families, her friends. Many, many people were as impressed with Ellen as I was. When she was in the hospital, she lay dying of cancer that really struck her down rather quickly. And as she was dying in bed, she had all the people that she knew that were relatives of hers, close friends, relatives. She had them each come to her bed one at a time, and she blessed them. She prayed for them like a matriarch of Israel. Here she is, she's dying, and she's concerned to leave a blessing behind her. I'm so moved by that. She prayed for them. I remember one of her nephews. She told him, "Go be great." She blessed him with that confidence in him. Go be great. She was fantastic. And today we come to another fantastic woman who, although I've been studying the Bible for 60 years, I never really gave her much attention. And that was a mistake, because she's one of the greatest women I've encountered. And she's the kind of person who would be easy to overlook. Rahab was the Canaanite prostitute. In Jewish thought, you can't get any lower than that. She's from a pagan people, a Canaanite prostitute. Now, there's some debate. Some scholars want to say that she's an innkeeper. I think the truth may be both, not either. Because the word zonah is definitely the word that is normally used in Jewish life in Hebrew for a prostitute, and that's what she's called. She's called a zonah. But even if she was an innkeeper, she may have been an innkeeper who, on occasion, sold her sexual favors to those who stopped by. That was not the goal of the two Hebrew slaves, rather two Hebrew spies, by the way, but I get ahead of myself. Rahab is going to teach us tonight, this afternoon, about how faith works. And there are three thoughts that I want to cover. I believe that this lesson has the potential to revolutionize our lives. So it brings an insight that can and should be practiced every day. And I believe if we do, we will reach this third point, increase. And I've made all these points with a letter I to make it easier to remember. There are three factors: in-breathed information, secondly, implementation, and third, increased. Let's begin first with in-breathed information. What did Rahab learn about the God of Israel? This is one of the things about her that's amazing. She's from a polytheistic culture, a culture that believes that there are gods of the hills, gods of the valleys, gods of harvest, gods of war, gods of every conceivable assignment and territory and people group. And yet, when these two spies come knocking on her door, she knows who they're from, because everybody in the land is on edge, because these Hebrews have been conquering everybody, the people around, near them. And when they come knocking on her door, one of the things she says is that I know that your God has given you this land. Now think about that. She's not treating the Hebrew God like a localized God or a God of one people. She says, the land that I'm occupying, that my family occupies, that my people occupies, that we've always thought of our own under the protection of our gods, I know that your God has given you this land. Now she goes through a worldview change that I'm kind of obsessed with. She recognizes that the God of the Hebrews has given them her city, her culture, her land. She also knows that the God of the Hebrews has led them to defeat their enemies in Egypt and also in Bashan, Og, and Sihon, the kings of that area, that the news has come back that they've just wiped everybody out. And she says, we're all terrified of you. We're depressed. So she recognizes that this God of the Hebrews has defeated their enemies and all the peoples around them. And she tops it off by saying, I know that your God is the God of heaven and earth. Now, we're used to hearing that kind of language. But coming from her, in her culture, she's saying that all our cultural, spiritual assumptions about localized gods assigned to different areas and different people and people groups, different people groups, and different areas of life and different geography, all of that has got to be thrown out the window. I know that your God is the God of everything. So she's an extraordinary woman. She hasn't had a long time to think about this. You know, the Hebrews are approaching our city. They haven't marched around Jericho yet, but the people in Jericho, which is a city state, they know that something ominous is up. And here, in the midst of the business of life, she puts all of this together. So when these Hebrew spies come knocking on her door, she immediately hides them. Let's look at that. We've looked at her in-breathed information. The reason I use the word in-breathed, it's better than inspired. Inspired really comes from the Latin word inspirare, which means in-breathed. She has information that either she has breathed in about God. That information can be out there, but you can leave it exterior to yourself. You need to breathe it in, take it in, or perhaps it's also information that God has breathed into her, intuitions, and in our case it would be scripture that becomes part of our bones and our flesh. So we breathe it in, and God breathes it into us. So she's got in-breathed information. But what about the implementation? It's not enough to know holy things. In the book of James, James says, you believe that God is one? Well, even the demons believe and shudder. So just believing something is not enough. It is not enough. The question is, what does Rahab do because of what she knows of God? If she had done nothing, then the end of the story would be entirely different. But look what she does. She receives the spies, very dangerous. It's likely she would have been killed by her own people for receiving the spies. She not only receives them, she hides them. I'm reminded of people, the righteous among the nations, who hid Jews during the Holocaust, whose whole families would have been killed by the Nazis if the word got out. These were extraordinary people. And she's an extraordinary person. She hides these spies. Then the king's messengers come to her door. Apparently somebody's reported, we saw these foreigners around your place. Some people told us that they're here. She lies to them. She says, yeah, they came, but I sent them away. She lies. And again, if she got found out, it would have been something. I'm reminded of my friend. Well, let me make this final point. I'll give you another illustration. She also makes a covenant with them. She believes that the Hebrew people are honorable, that they will keep their covenant. She believes their God is honorable. She makes a covenant with them. All of this is happening in one night. Now, my friend Michael Rydelnik, definitely one of my best friends. Michael's parents were both Holocaust survivors. They both were in the camps. His mother was a German Jew, and she was a believer when she went into the camps. She was also a nurse. And the Nazis assigned her to a hut where they put all the typhus patients. And her job was to watch these typhus patients. And apparently the Nazis would give her for a month, maybe, a handful of aspirin, which was meaningless. And she kept her Bible all throughout the Shoah because she hid it under the typhus patients. And the Nazis wouldn't come in the door of that hut because it was very, very, very infectious. Now, Michael told me that his mother was the most neurotic and self-involved woman you could imagine. But during the Holocaust, in the camps, every day, she lied about the serial numbers of the people in the room. She had to do paperwork for the Nazis who were fiends about paperwork, and she had to report the numbers of the prisoners that were in her care in that hut. And every day she lied. Why? Because if those people's numbers came up 3 days in a row, the Nazis would execute them. So there, in the darkest of nights, Michael's neurotic, self-involved mother shone a true hero, a giant. You know, what a story. And Rahab is a giant. Rahab is just it's remarkable at how she puts things together and makes a plan of action. So she not only had inbreathed true information about God and God's world, but she implemented that information in action. And finally, from that, she receives increase. She saves herself and her family. You know, some people would say, this is some whore in Canaan. They wouldn't give her 2 cents. They wouldn't give her 2 cents. Well, this prostitute in Canaan, who may have been a prostitute because there was nothing else she could do, it's very likely. She's also a businesswoman. She has all that flax that she's storing up there in her roof. So she's got a side hustle of trying to raise, she's taking people into her house, apparently. She may be sharing sexual favors or may have done so. That's apparent. She's also got what we call a side hustle where she's doing something about textiles, schmatters. But she, in one night, she puts everything together, and by doing so, she saves herself, she saves her entire family, her father's household, which is not just her relatives, but her father's whole circle of association. The word bayit in the Old Testament refers not simply to your relatives, but to those people who are like family to you. It can even be your former slaves, your present slaves, employees, your sons and their daughters and their children, your whole entourage. She rescues all of them. And she wins an everlasting reputation. She's mentioned in Hebrews 11:31 for what she did. She's mentioned in James 2:25, again, for what she did. She acted on faith, through trust. She received the spies and sent them away. That's what it said about her. So she had not only inbreathed information, she implemented that information. And through doing so, she became part of our people in some way, and she became an ancestor of the Messiah. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive for a woman who enters our story as a prostitute in Jericho. She's a giant. So what do we get out of this? Your faith, my faith, will work in our lives if we put this little formula into practice. Inbreathed information in multiplied implementation yields increase. In other words, take what you know about God and repeatedly implement it. And this will bring increase in your life. It will bring blessing in your life. Now, the important thing, and I want to show this to you, I'm going to go off the screen here. I want to show you with my hands. The important thing is we all have faith, knowledge is up here, but our implementation is down here. So it's true for all of us. Some of us have a huge gap, some of us have a smaller gap, but we all know more than we practice. So the pathway to fruitfulness is to bring your practice, your implementation, closer to your level of knowledge. If you do that, the more you do that, the more you bring your behavior in line with what you believe, the more blessing you will encounter, the more increase you will encounter. So that's admonition number one. Bring your implementation in line with your information. And secondly, take steps in your life that you're continuing to grow in your knowledge of God. Paul the Apostle says that the goal that he has for his people is they bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. So I encourage you, increase your inbreathed information about God. I suggest that we all become people who, like Ellen, are just fiends about the Bible. Here she had a schedule where, let's see, let's say she gets home at 11:30 at night, she's up at 6 in the morning, that's 6.5 hours. That's not much. But she found time to study the Bible despite that extraordinarily busy schedule. And she didn't just study it to know it, she studied it to live it. So study the Bible, become a fiend about it. It's not just information, it's inbreathed information, and it's meant to be implemented. Grow in your knowledge, increasing in the knowledge of God, and bearing fruit in every good work as you multiply your knowledge by implementation. Inbreathed information, multiplied in implementation, yields increase. And increase is another word for fruitfulness, another word for blessing. So I dare to believe that this simple lesson, broken down into this kind of formula, could be a source of tremendous blessing for you in your life and my life for the rest of the days that we live. I want to say one more thing. From the New Covenant reading, you remember the three guys who their leader, their boss, he gave them these manot, these portions. A manna was about 15 years of a laborer's income. It's equivalent to about $1 million in our day. So that was not inconsiderable. What was the mistake that the guy who got punished, the mistake he made is that he had the resources, he had the information, he had the opportunity, he had an opportunity, but he didn't implement anything. And that's why he was a loser. Let's not make his mistake. Let's implement and see what happens. Shabbat Shalom.